and welcome back to Janky AF. Alright, I've been wanting to make this video for quite some time now, and the other day my hand was forced when I saw in the real world, for the first time with my own eyes, a Maserati MC20. Now I am quite fascinated with this car. It's been a long time coming. I'm also quite fascinated with the Ford GT. So I wanted to talk about those two cars, and obviously they're very expensive cars for most folks. So I heard someone talking recently about, supercars and buying supercars, and if you watch someone like JM, who is a great channel, you'll see that people buying supercars and people buying very expensive cars still are operating with a budget. There is a difference between $170,000 and $300,000 that, even if you would consider that person wealthy, they have the discretionary disposable income to spend $170,000, they're most likely financing it in a lot of cases. And that's quite a bit of money on a monthly payment. So budget is still a concern with these cars. Now recently the Ford GT has skyrocketed in value like a lot of cars. Actually, I shouldn't say recently because as we'll see, it was selling for over $100,000 over MSRP when it first came out because it was such a hot car. And the second generation is no exception. Now Ford tried their best to make sure that these would get into the hands of collectors and people that would keep them. But inevitably, we see them being sold at auction more and more, especially over the last year. And both the first and second generation Ford GTs have, at least doubled in value over their MSRP, and in some cases more than that. So I wanted to play this little, do this little thought experiment. Well, I said, well, maybe I missed out on a Ford GT. I really wanted to buy a Ford GT, but they're just too expensive. And we can game this out for a first gen and for a second gen Ford GT. So I thought a really, really good alternative would be a Maserati MC20, particularly for the second generation, just because it is so much cheaper and because they both have V6 engines that are making, below, well, I guess the new ones make 660, somewhere in the ballpark of 630 to 660 horsepower. On paper, they're a little bit similar. I think the Maserati MC20 is a breathtakingly good-looking car. I think it's going to age extremely well. For folks that were really excited about the Alfa Romeo 4C, but then ultimately a little disappointed, granted this is a much more expensive vehicle, but I think it is really the complete package. I mean, obviously it's very, very fast, and it's gotten very, very good reviews. Now, there was some trepidation about when it first came out. They were kind of delaying things. It was a little obtuse. People were saying, oh, here goes Maserati being Maserati again. Now, Maserati as a brand, which plays into this whole video, has been, pretty panned lately, and, with some good reason. It's like an $80,000 Chrysler. They are owned by, under the Stellantis umbrella, and even before that, they were owned by Fiat Chrysler. Famously, Doug DeMuro has panned some Maseratis, and I'm a big Doug fan, so it's no shade on him, but I've always had sort of a soft spot for Maseratis. And if you go back way back when, and you look at the old Ghiblis and the old, even the old Quattroportes were these really funky sedans. The biturbo was like a weird car. But if you go back into like, 60s, 70s Maserati, and then obviously before, like the 3500 GT is a beautiful car. One of the first cars with fuel injection. Jay Leno's got a great video on that. But I've always liked Maserati as a brand. There's that famous Joe Walsh song where he talks about driving his Maserati. I've always thought it's a really, really cool brand. And even when I see modern Quattroportes, and when I see, I forget what they call them, the GT or the Gran Turismo or the 3200, whatever they're calling it, that sort of two-seater. Now, if you can get one of those with a manual transmission, too, that's a really, really good budget sports car because it basically has a Ferrari engine in there. I think most modern Maserati engines are Ferrari derived. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And I just think they're really cool cars that can be had for, pretty cheap money. Now, the Cambio Corsa transmission, this sort of, I'm not sure if it's actually a automated manual or if it's, if there is a clutch in there or not. I believe there is a clutch. I believe those have problems. But setting that aside, I've always sort of had a soft spot for Maserati. So when they came out with this MC20, I was just blown away by the styling. I mean, quite honestly, I'm a big, styling is such an important thing for cars to me. because I am not a race car driver. I cannot tell you the super fine details and handling differences between, you know, car X and car Y. I like driving. I don't drive blindingly fast. Again, I'm not a race car driver. So styling is very important, and not even from like sort of a superficial standpoint, like in, you know, the LA car culture where the car is basically your clothes and you're trying to make a statement with it. I just like looking at very beautiful pieces of art, and you know, if they roll down the road and they can take you places and you can have fun driving them, all the better. So I think the MC20 is an absolutely astoundingly beautiful car. I just think it's, you know, I like it better than McLaren. I like it better than Lotus. I like it better than most modern Ferraris. I really, you know, for me, it harkens back to like the Ferrari Dino, that mid-engine car, and a lot of these really classic cars from like the sort of 60s and 70s. Even the new, what's not the T50, but the T33, the new Gordon Murray offering is similar to this, where it just has these sort of like very, you know, large headlights. There's a lot of curves going on. It's not so angular, and I just think it has really supple, beautiful lines. And with that, we should probably get into some research and actually see some pictures of the car. But you know, you can picture it and you can go look it up nonetheless. So let's look at some prices of the Ford GT currently. We'll do a quick Wikipedia. Most people, if you're watching this video, you know what the Ford GT is. Now, interestingly, the first one was only made from 2005 to 2006, a very short run. The second one they made for 17 to 22, so, you know, 5 years if this research is to believe. So I didn't know that. It's kind of cool that they made it would be funny to me if the first gen was actually more rare than the second gen, but the fact that the second gen is so much more expensive makes them kind of equally hard to get. Now, I could go on for days about how much I love the Ford GT. To me, it's an absolute halo car. It's an absolute dream car. And, you know, speaking of Doug DeMuro, he got in probably right at the right time, right before prices really started to skyrocket. But even now, if you think about it, you know, they're going for around $400,000 to $500,000. If you think about what else that money gets you in terms of like really crazy cars like a Pagani or like even some of the top end Lamborghinis, the one-offs, the Bugattis, like I'd take a Ford GT over any of those cars all day. So in that respect, it still is kind of a bargain. Now, obviously, your first gen was a V8, and that's like a standard, harkening all the way back to the Ford GT40, making around, I believe, 550 horsepower, something like that. 6-speed manual transmission. The second gen was, of course, a V6. It was the EcoBoost V6, and it was actually based off of the F-150's engine. And people are like, oh, it's a truck engine. Whatever. Like that, I have very little patience for that, because one, if it was a truck engine, that'd kind of be cool to put it in a race car. That'd be kind of janky and fun. But also, you know, they're doing so much engineering to these engines, and most importantly, you know, when it goes like it does and it wins Le Mans, like, you know, who's going to be arguing where this engine was derived or what other applications it was being used in? So there we have it. 660 horsepower after the first year, 647 horsepower in the first year. So a significant power boost. Now it is turbocharged. I have not driven this car. I would imagine the turbo lag is very minimal on it, and when you hit the gas, you're not really too concerned about or thinking about turbo lag. You're just trying not to void your bowels. Okay, so there you have it. Brief overview. Let's go to prices, and of course we'll look at the legendary Bring a Trailer. And now I love this because you have just a really obvious upswing on graph on your, you know, Heritage Edition. Now, Heritage Edition, as it turns out, is about a $200,000 premium over a non-Heritage Edition. Heritage Edition is, of course, like this Golf-esque livery, the orange and blue, very classic, very timeless, very wonderful. However, if you go back to 2018, a 6K mile one sold for just $235,000. And now, if you look at the last 8 sold, the only one that actually passed reserve, looks like we have 405, 430, 521, the ones with no stripes. Yellow will go for higher. Red with white stripes seems pretty common, so that's probably about the cheapest. You have a 5,700 mile one here for $375. So you can get them under 400,000. But let's say 400 to 500,000 is about, you know, what you're looking at if you want to get a first gen Ford GT. And again, with about a $200,000 price premium for the Heritage Edition. I personally, I would get the highest mileage one I could find, because that's just what I like to do. And that's what a lot of car YouTubers like to do. But also, I'm cheap, and it would be cheaper. And I think, like, you know, the maintenance on a 6,000, if you bought any other car, if you bought a Honda Accord and only had 6,000 miles on it, you'd be like, well, that's nothing. But on a, you know, exotic supercar. Also, there's something to be said for cars that have been driven, because, you know, they're not just sitting there. And when they sit, obviously, things can wear out and go bad. So there you have it. Let's call it 400 to 500,000 for the first gen Ford GT. Okay, that's your market. We have some more that are actually for sale at dealerships. 429, 409, 424, 399. So again, you can get, and that has 26,000 miles. So that is the argument for the lower mileage ones, is that you're not paying that much of a premium. 549. 439, 425, and that's with, looks like maybe no stripes, which is kind of cool. 695. Then as soon as it goes to the second gens, it always just says call for price. It's so much money, they're not even gonna, they're too embarrassed to show it on the screen. That, or they want to have some negotiating leeway, so they're not going to put a price on it, because maybe they can sell it for $200,000 more than they think they can to the right buyer. So let's look at the second gen Ford GT. Okay, so that's our baseline, $400,000 to $500,000. Second gen. Now these have really kind of just started to hit the market, you know, in the last couple of years, because again, I think Ford didn't want anybody to actually just flip them. And so you have people that, hopefully most collectors have held onto them. Hopefully they're driving them. That is one great thing about Jay Leno. Like, he just buys the cars. Now he has obviously the resources to afford to do that, and he never has to sell anything. But if you're just selling a Ford GT, I doubt you need the money, but I digress. So, last 8 sold, we have 1,025,000, 1,275,000, right, a million right on the dot, 1,010,000, 1,075,000, 1,230,000, 1,080,000, and then we have a Carbon Series that was 1.2 million, 1,003,000, 1,150,000 for a Heritage. Now this is interesting. The Heritage doesn't really seem yet to command much of a premium. You have a 1,200 mile here for 924,000, 985,000. Tim Allen sold his Ford GT. That was a little bit mysterious to me why he did that, but that's his choice. 910,000, 883,000. So even within the last year, these have gone up about, you know, $100,000 to $200,000. If you look back at December of 2020, we have one for 826,000. Now that seems like a bargain now, because you're probably going to get at least $1 million for it right now. And so that's, you know, it takes money to make money, as they say. You know, $180,000 profit in a year for literally doing nothing and driving a sweet car. That's pretty good business. Okay, so there we have our market. Let's call first gen 400 to 500,000. Let's call the second gen $1 million. All right, so that's our budget. Now, what I want to do here, of course, I'm going to call this video if you can't afford a Ford GT. So we will play that game, but then we're also going to play the game of, well, for a Ford GT, what could you also get for that money? Now, the Maserati MC20 just released, I guess 2020, but it seems like they're just starting to really get out there now. There was some delays, blah, blah, blah. The Maserati was real big about saying how they have this completely proprietary engine, the Nettuno engine, which is a big selling point, in-house engine, completely Maserati. It's completely bespoke, everything on this car. I have read some things very briefly about people saying, oh, it's really just a Ferrari engine. They didn't change that much about it. You know, you guys can argue that. And again, for me, it's like, I just think it looks so cool. I think it looks amazing. And the one I saw was a white one. I just gush over this thing. I mean, to me, it's like perfect. Like, there's not a bad line on it. It looks very, very modern. I love the wheels, and they have this trident design on them. I love everything about it, and it seems like it's going to age really, really well. Yet at the same time, it doesn't look derivative of really anything. Like, I can't really tell you what this looks like. You have these big front scallops. You do have a little bit of Ford GT. The headlights are round, yet still have a little bit of angularness on them. It's unquestionably a Maserati. I like that. Like it doesn't leave anything, you know, they don't like tuck a little badge in there somewhere, but it's not, you know, it's not crass either by the same token. This big sort of, you know, off-colored element here on the bottom just gives you this really narrow band in the middle, which accentuates your haunches on the sides. It's just breathtaking. The fact that it's a Targa, and also with this car, apparently they're going to do one that's all electric, or so they claim. So that's kind of a cool option if you want to get out of the gas game altogether and get an EV model. And apparently they've engineered it from the beginning to be, have some sort of electrified component. Now, whether that's a hybrid or a full electric, we shall see. So let's take a look at the market. Now, these were supposed to MSRP for around $250,000, which seems like a real bargain if you think about it. Now that's, you know, I guess in McLaren range and some lower end Ferrari ranges, although quite honestly now, especially when you spec them, it seems like a lot of the Ferraris are going to jump over that point. And obviously the new, like the SF90 and stuff like that, the power is going to be more than this, but in real practical application, how much do you really use all of that power? I would say. So this blue one, which happens to be the cheapest one, is $312,000. So we're getting 70 grand, 75 grand over MSRP, which I think, despite it's sucking if you want to actually buy one of these and not being able to get one for MSRP, is a good sign. Just like when the first gen Ford GT came out, when it was $100,000 over MSRP, you have a real demand for these vehicles. It seems like people are buying them and people really like them and they're willing to pay over sticker for them. So if you're looking at it from a strictly like a collector angle, it does seem like these things are going to hold their value. Now, I'm not sure how many Maserati is making, and that would be a really good question. If you know, please leave it in the comments. Suffice to say that it does seem like a pretty hot car. Look at the proportions on this. Like, I would love to see this. I mean, I did see one in person, but it was just driving by. Now, it did look like pretty big. It looks very small here. But I think the proportions are just perfect where it's not like huge. It feels very tight and compact. But yet it does flow and undulate very, very nicely. Again, we can see these beautiful, even just this little strip here, you have these sort of parallel lines going up here and going here. I always talk about this with Ford Aerostars, how these cool, and again, that is contrasted with your parallel diagonal lines going here on your doors. So you have this beautiful contrast of lines, which draws all this fun negative space and all these sort of cool dichotomies within the car. It looks good in profile. Again, I really like these wheels, these Trident wheels. There's something different. Like, everything is very unique, and I really like that Maserati has been able to achieve that. You know, you have your like quote unquote Lambo doors, so that adds some flair and some panache to the whole thing. Like, it really is, to me, a proper supercar. But at $300,000 in today's market, that is a good price point, I think. And you're getting something really, really special. I love this blue. I think this blue is absolutely wonderful. Even the rear end. Now, the only thing I'll say with the rear end, a little bit of Aston Martin going on here for sure. But I think that's cool because I know Aston Martin's coming out with their like hypercar or whatever. But for me, like, it's a mid-engine car, so it doesn't really, you know, even though your taillights are kind of Aston Martin here, it doesn't, like, you know, you're not going to mistake this for like a DB7 or something like that, because you can tell that it's, you know, a mid-engine car. Nothing too crazy. You know, the Lamborghinis are great, but they're like a little like Mountain Dew, you know, they're a little like hyperbolic, which I'm all for that. I think they're, you know, every car is a great car, as we say here on Janky AF, but I like that this is very, very tasteful to me. This is an extremely tasteful car that's also, yeah, just a really great rear end. Almost a little bit of Jaguar XJ220 going on there, if you squint. This great little lip here. And again, just very bubbly and bulbous, but in all the right places. I like how the rear and front haunches around your fenders, and the way all these lines scoop together, the way it triangulates backwards and narrows out is very, very nice. I love the Trident logo right here on the side, beautifully placed, just the right size. And of course, you have your glass or plexiglass that shows off, you know, the power plant. Look at this. If you just go one to the other, the front and the rear, it's just really, really well judged. So Now here's a one for 340. We'll just take a look at one just to see another color. I think it also looks excellent in black. I will say also a little bit of Ferrari 360 in here. But again, I don't think you'd mistake it for a Ferrari 360. And quite honestly, the 360, while a fantastic car and one that I really, really love, to me, when I see it, especially the interior, just looks, I don't want to say dated, but like I think a Ferrari 328, I think I'd rather have over a 360, just because it's somewhere in the middle. And I think because the headlights are not quite as round, it is a unique shape, and it looks a little bit more balanced front to back than the 360. And of course your front end with your big sort of, you know, fish mouth here, also quite different. Just beautiful, and then these big scoops on your hood. Again, very kind of Ford GT like in a way, but I just think like just an excellent looking car. I'm really jazzed about the MC20. I think it's a big moment for Maserati, and I really hope it's successful. So the kicker here, the catch, and what I've sort of clickbait titled this thing is, so let's just do the math real quick, okay? Say you're getting this lovely blue one for $312,000. Now, here are your options. You could get, okay, a Ford GT. So let's say you're getting, you know, your average one for 400,000. That's the bottom of the market. Say you're getting, you like a color, certain color combination, you're up to 450, 470. You're going to have between 100 and 100, well, let's say 80 to $150,000 to play with if you want to get an MC20 instead of a Ford GT, and still have money left over. Now you can either pocket that money or you could buy something else. What I would buy is this, which is a Ford GT40 replica. This is negotiable at $155,000. It's for sale right now in Roswell, Georgia. Excuse me. I think white over red, fantastic color combination. I really like these GT40s in white. White with blue stripes, I think, is a really nice one. I used that car in Gran Turismo, so it has sort of a, and just white and blue is a classic Ford scheme. Now here you have all the theater of the GT40. This giant, big, you know, the entire, it's like a tractor trailer. The entire rear cab comes off. Obviously, you have some sort of Ford V8 in here. Your giant big headers. All your suspension and everything is exposed. Now this is a real legitimate race car. I mean, that's sort of the selling point here. So now you combine 150 plus 312, and what are you at? You're at, excuse me, I can't do math. You're at 462, okay? So you're less than the majority of the Ford GTs out there, and now you've gotten your Ford GT. In fact, you've gotten an actual Ford, I know I say actual, you've gotten something that is going to feel much more like the actual legendary Ford GT40, the seminal car that started all of this hoopla, because it's going to be, you know, like more or less a hand-built race car. So it's going to, you know, in terms of your driving, in terms of your, like the noise and the rawness of it, you're going to get all that. And obviously the amazing looks. This probably actually is closer to 40 inches instead of the 44 inches of the first gen GT. And you can have that, and that's your like sort of, you know, visceral experience. And then you have your MC20, which is more your cruiser and your GT car and your daily driver. So for both of these cars, you're only at $462,000, which again is like the price of most first gen GTs. Now, I have to say, I get it. Like, I get that it's not the same. I get that if you want that car and that's your dream car, you're going to get that car. Like, of course. Like, this is just like I said, a thought exercise. But I do think it's funny. I always like to look, especially when I see a really expensive car, because I love Ford Aerostars. I'm like, I could buy that car, or I could buy like 20 Ford Aerostars. And sometimes for me, quantity is better than quality. Not to say there's anything wrong with the quality of a Ford Aerostar. I thought that was a really great example of, I really, really like this. And I really, just in general, I wanted to talk about these GT replicas because I think they're a crazy performance bargain. I mean, some of them are going for just over $100,000. And in fact, we'll look at that and bring a trailer now. The GT40 is one of the all-time greats of motorsport, given that Ford doesn't own the name GT40 any longer. And that's a funny story about the Ford GT, which some of you may know already. There are numerous outfits building impressive replicas of the real thing that deliver much of the Lassar experience at a fraction of the cost. Couldn't have said it better myself. Now here we have the market, and you do have this one, the Bob Bondurant ERA GT that sold for $358,000, but largely the market is pretty flat on them. I mean, in 2017 we had one that sold for $123,000, and in 2022 we had one that sold for $125,000. So the market seems pretty consistent on these. The other funny thing is there doesn't seem to be a premium for the quote-unquote Heritage Edition, for the Golf Edition, because these are replica cars anyways, so it's just a paint job. It's not like chassis number whatever that's only, X amount of Y produced. And you can actually put the Golf logo on it, which Ford couldn't. So like, in so many ways, it's more real than the real thing, if you know what I'm saying. Like, I just think these are such a performance bargain. If I ever had $100,000 to spend on a car, God willing, you could get a nice air-cooled Porsche, or you could get like, an old Ferrari, but like to get it, like, these things are, you gotta figure, like when they built these race cars, they were just a race team in the 60s building cars. So now to build one of these things, like the technology has advanced so much that to build one of these, you can actually do it. It's just a big V8 in a tube frame chassis. And you can get that raw visceral experience that's gonna emulate the actual experience of driving a Ford GT40 race car back then, for a pittance of the price of what you would buy to buy one of these sort of modern futuristic replica, what should I call it? Tribute cars, or, there's a name for the retro futurism craze. So I gush over these because they're so amazing. Now I actually did look like this one. This one was only bid to $75,000, and I saw this. I think they were asking like 95 or something for it online. This one had gone up for sale. I think the yellow over white is a beautiful color scheme. The one thing I will say, some of these GTs look better than others. Like I know some are probably meant to be like a Mark II, so that looked a little bit different than the Mark I. But I would choose wisely because some they just look a little funky. They don't look quite right. Now I've even seen on Marketplace GT40 replicas built on Fiero bodies with automatic transmissions and like the Iron Duke engine. So I wouldn't go that low. If I was going to get a GT40 replica, I'd get something that was like, as good as I could get. But here's a beautiful black over gold for $115,000. So again, you add that to a Maserati MC20, you're still under the price of, in most cases, a 2005 or 2007 Ford GT. Okay? If you really want to go crazy, you could get a right-hand drive version. So this is like really like legitimate race car, right-hand drive, which I think a lot of the Le Mans cars were. Correct me if I'm wrong. Actually don't know that for sure. But here we have, again, the Golf livery. I just thought this was such a beautiful, beautiful car. Big Ford V8, beautiful. You have your, what do you call the little, I'm going to blank on this now. It's going to drive me crazy. The grommets. There you go. You have your grommeted seats, Ford GT40 dashboard, the whole deal. This is for sale for $92,500, but that's pounds, so I did a conversion here. $111,000, and you can get the real thing. I mean, obviously, I know it's not the real thing. It's not an actual GT40 that was raced. Those goes for crazy, crazy amounts of money. But I thought it was very interesting. Now, one last thing. Let's play another thought experiment, okay? Say you're in the market for a GT40, but $1 million is just, you can't justify getting one. Well, what if instead of getting a second gen for $1 million, $1.2 million, you get this Ford GT with 36,000 miles on it for $400,000. And then on top of that, you get a Maserati MC20 for $312,000. that puts you at that puts you at $711,000. So you could get a first gen Ford GT and a Maserati MC20 and a Ford GT replica, all for less than you could get for a second gen Ford GT. Now that is crazy. That shows you how much $1 million is for one of these cars. And maybe you just can't justify the money, but you have the money, or you have close to the money. Again, difference between $900,000 and $1.2 million. $300,000, it's still money, even to a millionaire, even to a multimillionaire. You know, that's a house somewhere. That's putting one of your kids through college or something like that. So instead of getting a second gen GT, you could get an original Ford GT40 replica that is going to be like awesome. Maybe it's your track car, maybe it's just your, you know, old classic car that you drive. And then you can get a Ford GT first gen. Maybe you want to keep the miles down on it, preserve the value of it, and maybe that's your, you know, semi-daily driver, your weekend driver, because they are pretty harsh still, even these first gen ones, and it's a manual transmission, and you know, you have the door issue in parking lots. So maybe that's your weekend cruiser, and maybe your MC20 is, you know, your daily driver, and you're still getting in less than you would for a second gen Ford GT. It does look great in this white as well, and that's the one that I saw. And these are kind of a cool wheel too. Really, really cool wheels. I mean, look at that thing. It's just breathtaking. So, if you've stuck around this long, God bless you. This is Janky AF, the jankiest automotive channel on YouTube, or all of the internet for that matter. And thanks for going through this little thought experiment with us. I really just wanted to sort of say how much I love the MC20 and the Ford GT, and then it was kind of fun to play with budgets and money and see what we could come up with. So there you have it. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, Janky do thanky.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.